Welcome to today's deep dive. I'm your host, and today we are looking at something that honestly sounds a bit impossible at first glance. Imagine bypassing 4 years of mandatory group projects, endless forced lectures, massive tuition fees, and instead successfully passing the entire MIT computer science curriculum in exactly 12 months.
I'm your resident expert today,
Yeah.
and yeah, it really does sound impossible on the surface. But when you actually break down the mechanics of human learning, it's entirely feasible. We're looking at a concept called ultralearning.
Right, which is heavily based on the work of Scott H. Young. And the sources we're diving into today, his reflections, project templates, notes on how artificial intelligence is rewriting the rules of skill acquisition, they give us this incredible step-by-step psychological framework.
Which is really the core mission of our discussion today. We want to give you, the listener, a blueprint to master hard skills faster, outsmart the competition, and accelerate your career.
Because if you think back to your own traditional education, it probably evokes a very specific, almost universal feeling. You're sitting at a desk, staring at a clock, just enduring these long stretches of boredom peppered with random frustration.
Yeah, you sit there passively waiting for the syllabus to be handed to you.
But what we are unpacking today flips that entirely. It's an aggressive, intense, results-driven path that you actually control.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, mastering this framework isn't just a neat trick anymore.
No, it's practically a survival mechanism. The modern economy is rapidly hollowing out the middle. Routine knowledge work is being automated. So the people who will thrive are the flexible, rapid learners. If you can adapt and efficiently acquire complex new skills, you have a massive advantage.
So before we can sprint, we have to know which direction we're going. We have to completely dismantle the old way we learned. And the sources draw this massive line in the sand between what they call dabbling and ultra-learning. Exactly. Dabbling is, well, it's what most of us are doing when we download a language app or buy a guitar and leave it in the corner of the living room.
Guilty. I definitely have a dusty guitar.
Right. There's no real commitment there. The second it gets cognitively difficult or boring, we just stop. Ultra-learning, on the other hand, requires deep self-reliance and agency. It's an active, deliberate choice.
And Young's MIT challenge is the perfect example of that. He didn't just passively read books, he used their open source materials, skipped the busy work, and focused entirely on passing the final exams. He engineered a specific path to a specific result.
Which leads us perfectly into the very first principle we found in the research, meta-learning, or, as the sources phrase it, drawing a map first.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the core idea here is that you have to learn how to learn a specific subject before you actually dive into the material itself. You have to ask why, what, and how.
The psychology here is pretty fascinating. A lot of us walk around with this underlying assumption that jumping straight into a textbook or firing up a video tutorial is the most productive way to start.
We want to feel like we're doing the work immediately.
Exactly. But different subjects require fundamentally different cognitive approaches.
I have to push back here, though, because honestly, spending time just planning feels like a massive form of procrastination to me. If I only have, say, 100 hours to learn something for my career, why in the world would I waste 10 of those hours just drawing a map?
Because it prevents you from walking full speed into a dead end. Think about the mechanics of the brain. Let's say you want to learn how to swim. That requires procedural memory. Your brain needs physical, sensory feedback from the water to build muscle memory.
Right, you can't just read about swimming.
Exactly. Now compare that to learning astrophysics, which requires declarative memory and high-level abstract conceptualization. If you use the same flashcard strategy for swimming that you use for astrophysics, you are literally going to drown.
Oh, wow. Okay, so it's about identifying the right cognitive tool for the job.
Precisely. Meta-learning forms the map. It shows you how to get to your destination without getting lost in the weeds of useless content.
The limiting belief here is thinking that starting immediately is best.
When really those who fail to plan are planning to fail. We confuse motion with progress.
Exactly. So a highly practical action step for you is to mandate that the first 10% of your total allotted study time is spent purely on mapping. Figure out the natural bottlenecks before you hit them.
So a great reflective question to ask yourself right now is, in your current professional development, are you learning passively or with clear agency? Because once you have that map, you have to execute.
Which requires navigating the second and third principles, focus and directness. Focus is foundational. You absolutely have to carve out chunks of undistracted time to do deep work.
Because the human brain cannot actually multitask complex problem solving, right? No, it just rapidly switches attention, which drastically drains cognitive energy. But principle 3, directness, is where the methodology really diverges from traditional schooling.
Yes, directness. This means learning by doing the actual thing you want to become good at. It's like the swimming example you just used. You don't sit in a dry library reading a textbook about water buoyancy. You just get in the pool.
Right, but here is where modern tools are actually hurting us. The sources point out how technology, specifically AI and gamified learning apps, actively work against this directness principle.
Oh, this is a critical point, the trap of what psychologists call verisimilitude.
Yeah, the appearance of reality. It's incredibly tempting to use gamified apps like
Yeah.
Duolingo because they give you the illusion of progress, but they remove all the psychological friction of the real world.
Right, you get those little confetti animations exploding on your screen, your streak counter goes up, and you just feel like a genius.
But what is actually happening in your brain? You are trading hands-on procedural experience for a convenient, comfortable alternative. You could play a language game on your phone for a year, ace every level, and still be completely paralyzed when trying to order food in a noisy restaurant in Paris
But wait, why does that happen? If I know the vocabulary, shouldn't I be able to speak it?
because of a concept called transfer. The human brain is highly contextual. When you learn a word in a quiet room, tapping a glowing screen, your brain associates that knowledge with that specific, stress-free environment.
So the app removed the social anxiety, the background noise of the clinking plate.
Exactly. It removed the unpredictable accent of the waiter. So when you are suddenly in Paris, the context is entirely different, and your brain literally cannot transfer the knowledge.
That makes so much sense. We have to strip away this limiting belief that fun, gamified AI simulations are an equal substitute for real-world practice.
The better mindset to build is realizing that discomfort is actually a biological sign of direct procedural learning. If you aren't feeling a little bit uncomfortable, you probably aren't rewiring your brain.
So if you want a tangible action step here, build a messy, real-world project while you are learning a skill. Force immediate application. If you're learning to code, don't just watch 4 hours of tutorials. Build a broken, ugly app on day 1 and try to fix it.
And ask yourself this reflective question. Are you currently trading hands-on experience for a comfortable alternative? Because as one source brilliantly observed, we often want to become great speakers, so we buy a book on communication rather than practicing presenting.
And once you are practicing in that real-world environment, you are inevitably going to hit a wall. You'll find a specific component of the skill that you are just terrible at.
Which is where the framework introduces the scientific approach to breaking through those bottlenecks. Drill and retrieval, principles 4 and 5.
Drill is principle 4. The strategy here is direct then drill. You jump into the real thing. Directness, you figure out what your weakest point is, and then you isolate that bottleneck. The sources use Benjamin Franklin as a great historical example.
It's a perfect illustration of time slicing and the magnifying glass approach. Franklin realized his writing and argumentation skills were weak, but he didn't just sit down and generically write more essays.
Right, he drilled. He took published articles from a magazine that he admired. He would read them, make short notes on the meaning of each sentence, and then completely hide the original article.
And then days later, he would look only at his notes and try to reconstruct the entire argument from memory. Then he'd meticulously compare his version to the original to isolate his exact flaws in vocabulary or structure.
What Franklin was doing requires incredible psychological discipline. He was intentionally attacking his own ego. And the mechanism he used leads seamlessly into principle 5, retrieval, or testing to learn.
Yeah, and here's where it gets really interesting. Because almost universally, people hate tests. We have been deeply conditioned by traditional schooling to view tests as a punishment.
Or like a final judgment of our worth. So when we study on our own, we just avoid them. We think studying just means rereading a textbook and highlighting it until the page is glowing neon yellow.
And cognitive science has proven that passive review, like highlighting or rereading, is incredibly inefficient. It creates this massive illusion of competence. Your brain sees the text and says, "Ah, I recognize this," so you assume you know it.
But recognition is not the same as recall.
Exactly. The psychology of retrieval shows that actively forcing your brain to reach into the dark and pull the information out from memory strengthens neural pathways far more effectively.
It makes me think of the brain like a dense forest. Reading a textbook is like flying over the forest in a helicopter. You can see the path clearly, but you haven't actually walked it.
I love that.
Retrieval is forcing yourself to land. Put away the map, and hack through the brush with a machete. It is slow and painful, but you leave a permanent trail that you can walk down again.
That is a phenomenal way to visualize it. The struggle of hacking through the brush is literally what triggers the brain to strengthen the synaptic connections. The sources even recommend a highly aggressive tactic called forward testing.
Forward testing, like taking a test before you study.
Exactly, taking the final exam or a practice test before you even start learning the subject.
Wait, taking the final exam on day one, you'd fail miserably. You wouldn't know a single answer.
Oh, you would completely fail. But failing that test primes your brain. It creates what psychologists call cognitive hooks and prediction errors. When you encounter a question you don't know, your brain registers a gap.
So later, when you are reading the material and find the answer,
Yes, your brain experiences a spike in dopamine and attention. It suddenly recognizes the information as highly valuable and it latches onto it.
so the big paradigm shift here is realizing that testing isn't an assessment of your inherent worth. It's a structural tool to cement knowledge. As the quote goes, retrieval takes less time than review, but not learning something at all is faster still.
So your action step. Try a session of closed book learning. Read a chapter, close the book, take out a blank piece of paper, and try to draw a concept map of everything you just learned.
It will feel difficult and frustrating, but that difficulty is the literal feeling of your brain building new synapses. Ask yourself, what is the weakest link in your current skill set that requires a painful but necessary closed book drill?
All right, so we've hacked through the forest to retrieve this data, and we're drilling our weak spots.
Hmm.
But how do we know if we're actually walking in the right direction?
And more importantly, how do we stop the forest from just growing back over our path a week later?
That brings us to principles 6 and 7. Feedback and retention. Feedback is about not dodging the punches. You have to learn to extract the signal from the noise.
The sources mention intentionally seeking out overkill environments for feedback. I absolutely love this example. Let's say you want to get better at public speaking. Joining a supportive group like Toastmasters is great for getting comfortable.
But if you want massive, rapid, undeniable growth, go volunteer to speak to an auditorium full of middle schoolers.
Oh man, that is terrifying.
Terrifying, but incredibly efficient. Why? Because middle schoolers have zero social politeness filter. If your joke isn't funny, they won't politely chuckle. They will look at their phones or start talking.
It gives you brutal, immediate, and highly accurate feedback on whether you are actually holding an audience's attention. It completely strips away your ego.
And we need to be incredibly careful with how we use AI for feedback right now, too. AI models, like ChatGPT, are often programmed using reinforcement learning from human feedback.
Right, so they display what's called sycophancy.
Exactly. They're literally mathematically weighted to be polite, to agree with you, and to avoid offending you.
You've probably noticed this if you've ever asked an AI to critique an email or an essay you wrote. It almost always tells you it's a great start before giving very mild, safe suggestions.
It is programmed to please you, not to make you a master of your craft. The limiting belief to drop is that ego-boosting feedback is the most helpful. You must actively seek out environments and mentors that give you the unvarnished truth.
Which moves us directly into Principle 7, retention. Don't fill a leaky bucket.
If we look at human biology, the default setting for the human mind is actually to forget. It's an evolutionary feature, not a bug. Your brain is a massive energy consumer.
So if you learn a new fact, but you don't use that neural pathway again, your brain assumes it isn't necessary for survival.
Right, and through a process called synaptic pruning, it reabsorbs those resources.
Yeah.
The memory decays. We are biologically wired to dump information we aren't actively using.
So how do ultra-learners combat millions of years of evolution?
They engineer systems. They don't just rely on willpower. The most powerful tool is spaced repetition. By reviewing information at gradually increasing intervals, say 1 day, then 3 days, then a week, then a month, you consistently interrupt the brain's forgetting curve.
You basically trick your biology into believing this information is a recurring, vital part of your environment, so the brain permanently insulates those pathways.
The sources also talk about procedurization, which is turning facts into physical habits and using mnemonics. The mnemonic example from Benny Lewis, the language learner, is completely wild.
Oh, I loved this part. He uses tools to generate highly vivid, bizarre mental images to memorize vocabulary. For instance, the French word chavirer, which means to capsize.
Right, which sounds vaguely like the English phrase shave an ear.
Yes, so to remember that chavire means to capsize, he visualizes a giant, grotesque, disembodied ear sitting in a canoe, and the ear is shaving a beard with a razor right at the exact moment the canoe capsizes into the water.
It sounds utterly absurd, but that is exactly why it works. The brain's amygdala processes emotional and highly unusual visual stimuli much more strongly than plain text. You will forget a standard flashcard, but you will not forget a giant shaving ear falling out of a boat.
So the takeaway is that you must actively engineer systems to prevent natural memory decay. Your practical move here: go seek out your own overkill environment this week. Find someone who will give you blunt, honest critique.
And ask yourself,
Yeah.
are you filling a leaky bucket by failing to space out your review sessions? Because if you don't engineer that retention, you're just wasting your own time.
Okay, let's take stock of where we are. We've mapped our learning. We focused on the real world instead of the comfortable library. We've drilled our bottlenecks, forced our brains to retrieve data, demanded harsh feedback, and plugged the leaks with spaced repetition.
The data is firmly locked in our head.
But true mastery isn't just reciting data like a walking encyclopedia. It requires deep, flexible understanding and the courage to innovate. And that lands us on our final two framework pieces: intuition and experimentation.
Principle 8 is intuition, which means digging deep first. True understanding never comes from rote memorization. It comes from building a dense web of connections between concepts. And the absolute best way to stress test your intuition is the Feynman technique.
Named after the brilliant physicist Richard Feynman, the steps are simple to understand, but brutal to execute. First, you choose a concept. Second, you attempt to teach it out loud or on paper in plain language as if you were explaining it to a 10-year-old.
And that is where the magic happens. Because the moment you start explaining it, you will hit a point where you stumble or where you instinctively reach for a complex, jargon-heavy word.
If you use big jargon, you're hiding.
Precisely. Jargon is often a mask for lack of intuition. When you hit that roadblock, step 3 is to go back to the source material and relearn that specific gap. Then step 4 is to simplify it further and create an original analogy.
Because if you cannot explain a concept simply, you do not actually understand it.
And once you have built that deep, jargon-free intuition, you reach Principle 9, experimentation. Explore outside your comfort zone. This is the transition point where you go from being a student of a subject to a master of it.
Because true masters don't just perfectly walk the paths created by others, they eventually have to clear their own.
And here is where modern tools, like AI, actually become incredibly useful rather than a hindrance. You can use large language models to experiment with entirely new learning styles at scale.
The sources give a really cool example of this. You can prompt an AI to act as a world-class music instructor and have it build a highly customized 4-week practice schedule specifically designed to help you master the guitar part of Stevie Ray Vaughan's Voodoo Child.
You can tell the AI, hey, my pinky finger is weak, and it will generate infinite variations of practice drills just for you. It allows for rapid iteration.
But the critical mindset here is ruthlessness, right?
Yeah, exactly. You experiment with a new drill, a new schedule, or a new mnemonic technique, and if the data shows it isn't yielding faster results, you discard it immediately and try the next hypothesis.
So what does this all mean for us? We have these 9 distinct principles, from making maps to fighting our forgetting curve to building analogies. How do we pull all of this into a cohesive daily practice?
What's fascinating here is that experimentation is actually the glue. It ties all the other principles together. Great learning is not a static state where you just follow a checklist forever. It is an ongoing act of constant experimentation and refinement.
It forces you to take total responsibility for your own mind.
You aren't waiting for a teacher to tell you how to learn. You are testing your own brain to see what works best. The belief we need to abandon is the idea that the experts at the top of their fields just blindly followed an established curriculum. They didn't. They constantly experimented.
So the action step for you today, right now, is to take whatever complex topic you are currently trying to learn for your job or your hobby and use the Feynman technique. Try to explain it out loud to yourself in the car or to a friend without using any industry buzzwords. You will instantly expose the white spaces in your own knowledge.
And the reflective question to carry with you is, what is one completely new learning method or drill you can experiment with today, just to see if it yields a better result?
When you zoom out and look at this entire framework, what we are really talking about isn't just a study hack. It is a fundamental shift in identity. You are moving from being a passive student, trapped in a system that feeds you comfortable, busy work, to becoming an aggressive, self-reliant ultralearner who dictates their own curriculum and results.
And the sources point out something incredibly important. Successfully completing just one of these intense self-directed learning projects changes your psychological landscape entirely.
It equips you with the exact tools and the mental resilience you need to survive in an economy that demands rapid, continuous adaptation.
And that leads to a really profound final thought for you to chew on. The texts mention that completing an ultra-learning project gives you the confidence to execute the next one without self-doubt.
But what if the true prize of an ultra-learning project isn't actually the specific coding language you memorized, or the guitar riff you mastered, or the software you learned to use?
What if the ultimate reward is the permanent destruction of your own imposter syndrome?
Exactly. Think about it. If you can scientifically prove to yourself by hacking through the forest, drilling your weaknesses, and overcoming the friction that you possess the agency to learn anything efficiently.
How does that completely rewrite the limits of what you believe you can achieve in your lifetime?
Suddenly, you're not that kid sitting in a classroom anymore, staring at the clock, just waiting for the bell to ring so your life can begin.
You are the one building the clock.